Let's go.
Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. I'm your host, David Horsager. Join me as I sit down with influential leaders from around the world to discuss why leaders and organizations fail, top tactics for high performance, and how you can become an even more trusted leader. Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. It's David Horsager, and I'm thrilled about my next guest. He is a friend. We got to know each other when he was the Chief Culture Officer at the massive UnitedHealth Group, Fortune 5 company. He's up to some interesting things today, and I'm just grateful to have you on. Dave Sparkman, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Pleasure to be here.
Dave, give us a little quick little update. A couple things you're doing now. You're writing a new book. You're up to some cool ministry things. What's the 2-minute update?
Yeah, well, I'll make it less than 2 minutes. I'm currently serving as the executive director for a faith-based job transition ministry called Crossroads Career, where we help those people who are unfulfilled or unemployed. And I'm also in the process of writing a book, as you know, called Spark Your Culture, Lessons Learned to Ignite and Fuel Lasting Results. So hopeful to have that out in circulation by next year.
I love it. Well, this is some of the work we got to do together. And of course, I've even employed you and asked for your advice multiple times and had consulting from you as we've tried to grow our company. And you worked with us on the Trusted Leaders Summit most recently. But, we had some great years working together and partnering. I guess our institute partnered with UnitedHealth Group and all the great work you were doing. But let's jump in on this culture piece right away. What is culture?
Culture is defined by many, many different definitions depending on the person and the day, David. What I like to think of as culture is it really is the thing or environment that permeates through an entire organization. And that's driven most of the time by behaviors because that's what we can see. I believe it's deeper than that, though. I believe it is founded in the core beliefs that individuals bring to an organization and how an organization can create a culture of shared beliefs that then drive everything that organization is doing. So it comes out of the core values.
We can get into the how soon, but tell us just what was the progress you saw? And you were with a big consultancy before this, before UnitedHealth Group, but what was some of the progress you saw? It was pretty fun for me to watch some of the cultural change at a massive company. Many people think they can hardly turn around a little company or add to a small company, and yet there was a lot of great progress that happened at UnitedHealth Group. Just what does that look like when you see healthy culture, at least in parts of an organization?
For us at UnitedHealth Group, what it looked like was becoming very clear with what we believed and what we valued and how should we behave. And you've seen our core values, David, and prior to the establishment of that, there were some core values which no one knew what they were. Each of the different divisions of the business had their own core values, some of which overlapped, some of which didn't. And of course, no discussion ever took place around what those core values were or how they could be used. Once we made the decision, in this case, our CEO, Steve Hemsley, made the decision that we needed to become grounded and unified, that's where the actions started to happen. And we saw a lot of good results coming out of that.
And it seemed like one thing you did is, let me just ask, how do you cascade that? This idea of unity and alignment and I guess a common language. How did you cascade that throughout an organization?
Well, we didn't begin the way that societal culture begins today with a hashtag and a social media campaign. We did not go that route. Instead, we went directly into helping people what I call personally appropriating the values. Appropriate is a very strong word. I believe it's and usually when you're seizing something from someone else. And we wanted people to not just be accountable for the values and not just take ownership of the values. We wanted them to appropriate those values for themselves. And we did that through a workshop. And as you know, we also utilized the Trusted Edge Leadership workshops to additionally fuel that. Because we feel that the more that you help an individual become grounded in who they are and what they believe, that will then translate to the organization. So we started with the individual, and encouraged individuals to do things with their teams to cascade it. And then, of course, we employed all of the normal corporate communication vehicles we could to get the word out. But people are looking at people more than they're looking at memos. And how those people show up is what I think helped cascade it even more.
I'm going to come back to a little bit more of the cascading and your role in culture, but let's go to behavior because we've had some fun discussions about this. How do you actually change a behavior? We see so many people say they want to change a behavior, they want to change a habit, and they rarely do. What does it actually take to help others? We say we can't really motivate anyone else, right? But how do we help someone actually, where you've seen behavior change happen, what's been present?
Yeah, well, I'll just share my own example of me personally, David. The first step is awareness, right? Are you even aware you need to change? Because our behaviors are driven by what makes sense to us. We do what makes sense to us. Otherwise, most sane individuals wouldn't do it. When I become aware that there could be a different way to behave, and I'm shown what those alternatives could be, then I make a decision, if I use this, I'm going to get better results. And that's where the root starts. So I'm aware, and then I get an insight that I could change to something different. And then, of course, forming new habits. And that's where the how coming out of Trust Edge Leadership was just huge for me in some of my own personal habits in changing, because I then tied it to something that was meaningful and changed some habits. So awareness, insights, and then how to make that habit really stick was key.
How did you keep it going? For a decade or so, UnitedHealth Group had a tangible, and maybe they do more now. I'm not touching there as much. You're have moved on to other things, but in those days, for someone to even see positive culture change for a decade is pretty significant in organizations. How did it get reinforced?
We tried to reinforce it by telling stories of what others were doing to make significant improvements in their own operations, their own departments, their own teams. And whenever we would hear about that, this comes into the cascade. Then we tied into the communities that had been established through our culture work. And community is so important. All of us as individuals generally associate with some group of people. And we formalize that to some extent by creating an outfit called Culture Ambassadors. And Culture Ambassadors were simply someone that had been grounded in our United culture. And they voluntarily said, I want to continue in this. I want to know more. And that then gave us a license to utilize that group of people and shepherd them, if you will, but also receive from them many of the things that they were doing to then reshare it back out, basically broker that information back out to the community. And that just starts the wildfire burning because people get encouraged from what they see other people like themselves doing. So it's not, memos from Dave talking about something that maybe doesn't really resonate with them. These are their teammates, their peers that are doing things in different ways that get different and better results. And when we share that, that starts to get that flywheel turning faster and faster.
And I think you also did a really great job of back to the beginning of having a common language at the beginning, creating a common language in those values. And then you know what you're reinforcing, you know what you're cascading. And I remember Steve also had really clear priorities. I think at the time it was quality and something that everybody knew it, right? Throughout the whole organization. So having clear, over 300 and some thousand employees, but clear, people know their priorities and can think about what that means to them here now, and know this common language of how we do life, what these behaviors look like mattered. Speak to that.
Yeah, clarity, of course, one of the 8 pillars is huge, and alignment is huge. And you will never really get alignment unless you have clarity. There is a pattern of the chicken and the egg here, and clarity does come first, because unless you are able to, in our case, specifically define what we're looking for, in our case, the core values, and then start to attach things through those core values. And as we shared at the Trusted Leader Summit, the values lens that people can look through, you will see life differently when you're given a filter and you start to, make a point of looking through it. And you start to see things you didn't see before. And then with the workshops, starting to make people aware of their own behavior, letting them personally appropriate it, letting them tell the stories of what they did, sharing that, and then also recognizing it. We created a recognition platform around our core values and used a technology tool through another company to enable people all the time share what's going on. So it no longer became necessary to be brokered. So there was no bottleneck of me or anyone else. It was just out there. And basically taking the social media internal to UnitedHealth Group did a lot to help us progress.
You've had all these years as the chief culture officer. You've had years in consulting at one of the biggest consulting firms in the country. You've had years leading a ministry and a lot of other things. You're writing this book. Let's jump in and hear just a little bit about where that came from and the heartbeat of it. And then I want to get into a couple of lessons, at least, that you're writing about these days.
So I don't consider myself an author, David, as you and I have talked about. Words I can usually verbally process fairly well, but getting them onto paper and articulating that has been a challenge. So it's not something that I was really eager about doing. I do feel compelled that that's something that I should do. And I'm doing it because it helps my life purpose, fulfill my life purpose, which motivates me, which is to glorify Christ by helping people and organizations achieve their aspirations and his purpose. So the book is a vehicle to help that happen. And I feel like those 9 years that I spent in that role, I certainly learned a lot. I made a lot of mistakes. How could I help other people benefit from some of the mistakes and the lessons learned? And that's something that I feel we're all supposed to do in serving others. So if there's somebody that can benefit from that, that's the purpose of the book.
Tell me about your biggest mistake if you're up for it. What's one of your biggest mistakes?
Oh, how many can we count? I'll two immediately come to mind. One, which I think is common to a lot of people, is we always think when we want to change the culture, it's about George needs to change. It's not me. Our culture would be great if it were full of Dave Sparkmans. It's about George. And if George were only getting it, So the first mistake I made was looking to point to somebody else instead of pointing at myself. I needed to make changes. So that was the first mistake. And thankfully, I got through that one and then continued to learn over the 9 years. But then programmatically, there was a mistake we made. I made a decision that we wanted to try to institute another role, another community called values coaches. And it was trying to get after the natural intact teams, because we saw the leaders of those teams many times weren't really taking full advantage of our United culture the way we thought they could. So let's create a role where someone can come alongside them and help from their team, their natural work team, and help guide and influence that. And that just didn't work. It didn't take, which goes back to a host of other things where personal appropriation and not fully happened, and you can't substitute for that. People need to get it or they don't get it. And you've got to work around that. You can't substitute.
How did you get buy-in from leaders? Because many leaders, senior leaders even at United, did buy in. And that's a big challenge for a lot of people when they can't really do anything about it, but they need the buy-in of their senior leaders. How do you get that?
Oh, it is a key, essential thing, David. Leadership shadow, as we call it, is everything, which is walking the talk. If our CEO, Steve Hemsley, didn't want this to happen, it would not have happened. But what Steve did do was show extraordinary commitment and continuity of the longevity of what he wanted to see happen with our United culture. The other thing I am grateful for is he empowered myself and the communities to do work that maybe he would not have done himself. And that enabled us to try some new things without it necessarily being his. And so he, of course, as the CEO, always had the prerogative to overrule something, but he gave us a lot of leeway to try new things many of which happen to work. And so that leadership buy-in is one that I explore a little bit in the book, and it comes back to a belief system and a faith of taking action upon those beliefs, that the core values are truly what will drive the end game of people's behaviors. If all you do is focus on behaviors, in my opinion, you just have compliance. And compliance ultimately doesn't motivate people the way an insight or a belief and the conviction that goes with those beliefs can do.
That's so true. Wow. Well, we saw, and I was privileged to watch you and your team make some immense change and have a great impact, and just come alongside in a few ways over that time. What a treat it was. Let's get to this book, Spark Your Culture. What are a couple of the key lessons you especially that come top of mind, I guess, for sparking a high-performing, healthy, I would say high-trust culture?
Well, you hit one of them, Dave, and that's a common language. If you don't have a common language, it's just as silly as if you were speaking in Spanish or another language and I was speaking in a different tongue. We would not understand each other. We would not be able to move quickly. We would not be aligned. We would never get clarity. So a common language is something I expand upon. And closely related to that is to be very specific with what you're talking about. Many times leaders will say, well, we've got the core values written out, and that's what we should do. I was talking to a leader of another company just recently, last week, and he is a manufacturing facility CEO, and they were having some safety issues. Nothing significant. No one passed away or was killed, but people were injured. And he goes, Dave, we've got safety as one of our values, but it doesn't seem to be taken seriously by our workers. Well, let's back up the train a little bit and let's start to describe, what does safety mean to you and what is articulated already? And then how does that resonate with the people to whom it's being said? And you and I have both been around the block enough, Dave, to know that we can all hear the same message and interpret it very differently. And so unless you allow some time for that to settle and get more specific and granular, then you won't have that clarity and that alignment, to me, that are key to a hugely successful, transformative culture.
What does it mean here? What does it look like to you? I remember that even about your values. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the values had attached behaviors so they could see, what does that value look like? A lot of people have core values, they have values, but there's like, what does this look like here? True?
Correct. Yeah, we had a paragraph about the behaviors. And then, of course, once we established that, then our learning and development department was able to more fully blow that out into more specificity for a call center agent, for example, versus a nurse and versus a doctor, for example. And that's what we encourage our senior leaders to do, is take these values and now get very specific with your group of people. What does that look like every day? And let's go to some of your pain points, apply the values lens, get specific with what you expect. Because most of the time when a supervisor and a supervisee are in conflict or there's a lack of performance, David, it's simply a mismanaged expectations. The boss is thinking they were clear, and the person doesn't show up intentionally there to not do a good job. They're trying. They just don't seem to connect. And that's what we're trying to be more clear.
Even when we take the pillars, we go through an exercise, especially with character, and we say, what does character look like here? Because it turns out some people incentivize their sales teams in ways we never would as far as character. Or people have argued with me, Hitler had more character than Churchill. And what they mean is, if integrity is being the same in thoughts, words, and actions, of course, Hitler would get up at a certain time, go to bed at a certain time. He wouldn't even drink coffee. I mean, he was very congruent, I guess you could say, in a way. And yet, Churchill had moral character that was different, that really probably saved us all at the darkest hour of the 20th century. And so we have to put integrity with moral character in some way if we're going to get what we mean by character, right? Because just integrity being same, you can be the same in thoughts, words, and actions in ways that I wouldn't agree with at all.
Correct. Absolutely.
Most training and development initiatives don't last or even solve the root problem hindering an organization. That's where TrustEdge certification comes in. TrustEdge certified partners are equipped with a suite of tools to identify, benchmark, and close gaps in trust for good. Because when you solve the real issue, you get measurable results and a culture where people actually want to make an impact. So whether you're a trainer, a manager, an HR executive, or a leader in learning and development, check out trustedgeplatform.com and see how you can start solving the root issue and get lasting results in your organization. And now back to the show.
So there's a CEO out there or a VP or a CHRO listening right now, and they're thinking, I think culture is important. I can see how we could be higher. Our culture's dying. There's poison. There's all these issues, and I could see how, in our company, we part of our mission is creating high performing cultures built on trust. But they see the need, but they're like, where do I start? What would you encourage them to even do, to think about, to move forward, and to even care, or even get buy-in from others in senior leadership to take culture seriously as a real goal? In fact, I was just thinking about our research. I think I have it right here. This was not set up, actually. I had this from the last interview I did. I wonder if I can find it very quickly. Basically, if I can pull it out right, what people are asking, if most people are listening instead of watching, but by far in organizations, when people were asked where do they want their executives to spend their attention or focus on, from not finance, not technology and equipment, not strategy, not the product or service, not this, but culture was by far number one, people and culture. And so what would you just encourage the executives to do to just start thinking about how to start this process toward a high performing culture?
I think a lot of companies, Dave, rely on what I call the 5 Ps to drive their business and the culture. They rely on the platforms, the programs, the processes, the projects, and in some cases, the personalities to drive what they're doing. And those are all very useful and necessary for a company to execute. But for culture, one of the lessons learned was wins oftentimes come from where you least expect it. And if you're not allowing every person to be empowered to execute the culture, if instead you're relying on the 5 Ps, you will never get that fulfilled or never sustain it as well as it could. And there are countless examples to go through. But if I were a CHRO or a CEO or a COO trying to say, how can I start to transfer my culture? First, I'd say, are you specifically defining what you want that culture to be? You've been around enough people where leaders that talk to you, Dave, saying, we need a culture of innovation, or we want a culture of trust, or we want a culture of integrity. Fill in the blank, but how well can they articulate it? So 1, specifically define. 2, you need to personally appropriate. Allow people to take ownership and seize what the values are. 3, you need to actively apply. And that's where these communities come into effect. And so to think that you're going to do it through a senior leadership team and then send memos out, that to me is just save your time and breath and paper. You've got to allow people the time to engage and encourage them to engage and recognize them and foment that activity. And then you've got to reinforce it all the time. And then last and this was a lesson learned, we had to keep it fresh. And that's where you and Trusted Edge leadership came in, because we had already established the values. We were well on our way, but yet how do we get, and I've said this at the Trusted Leader Summit, integrity and trust are core to the core values of every organization in the world, in my opinion. So how do you do trust? Well, Telly has it. Trust Edge Leadership has a methodology, has a platform to use that. So we were able to augment, supplement, complement Trust Edge within what we were already doing. And that helped people say, oh, there's another angle at which I could look at this. And as you know, we used other organizations to continually keep it fresh. So senior leaders listening today, When was the last time you tried something new? It may not work, but bring in some fresh voices, some fresh eyes, and allow your people to see that this is earnestly what you want to have happen. And if you're listening to them and empowering them, you'll get some great answers that you haven't gotten before.
What I think was brilliant about what you did is, many organizations go in and they have a flavor of the month. And that's a lot of times when people even bring in us or others and they just do that flavor of the month, just do a keynote or a workshop or something, right? And on the other hand, you have people have something that might be kind of good but get stale. And what you did is you had this core that kept getting fed in fresh ways. And so this core kept true, and yet there was a freshness to it. And I think that's in all my work on culture, in all the big Fortune 100 companies and universities and everything we work with. I think there was a uniqueness that I saw at UnitedHealth Group that I was really proud to be a part of.
And you benefited us quite a bit, Dave, and that provided yet another lens to look at life through, a trust lens, which helped make our values even more secure in being our values. A lot of organizations have the word integrity as a value. Well, that was a value for us. But when you start to put together all the people that contributed to what integrity meant at UnitedHealth Group, Trust Edge Leadership was part of that, as was a host of other organizations and individuals who helped us see it more broadly. And that's where I think a leader who's looking and maybe frustrated with something not working, get some fresh eyes on it. Get some fresh voices and see what they come up with. And also, most importantly, listen to your people. They know what is going to work and isn't going to work. But most companies are really into control, which is necessary for good execution. But how does that make the employee feel? And that's why I think we have the Great Resignation, because companies are trying to make good decisions on hybrid work environment, remote work, all these other things, very difficult to navigate through. But are they really talking and listening to their people versus, well, I'm looking at a number and I think I can do some math and that's where I get there. Well, anyone can do math.
So I'm going to jump here. We got to land the plane and I want to get personal. But before I do, you brought something up and I've got to go there.
Sure.
How in this work environment, this virtual work environment, I mean, I've got both sides. I feel both sides. You've got the workforce seemingly wanting more. I want this. I want that. I can get, I was just talking to someone yesterday, this person that was interviewing at this place, and they said, yeah, they have 2 free meals a day and there's a climbing wall. And I said, is that what makes culture, right? Is that what is going to make, it might get them there, but I don't know if that on its own makes culture, although it might bring in better people. And so you've got this thing of, I've been doing interviews lately of new people, and I've noticed several have been like, well, this is what I want. I want this, not what I'm going to give, right? Well, I actually need some people that are actually going to further the mission, right? That are going to give too. So where we've become much more flexible and everything. And I was talking to a senior leader about this also, where the less uniform you are. I'm not saying it's right. We have all different people, but the less uniform. So you want this flexibility, you want that flexibility, takes another level of management. It is difficult. So you have people that want more in certain ways and motivated, and there's different things. And you have leaders that are called to quarterly earnings and driving results and furthering missions too. So how do we, in this more virtual work environment, in some cases forever, how do we balance basically this honoring the unique human and helping them be their best, while having an aligned, unified culture, while having accountability? Because there's an article today, it's either in the Wall Street Journal or the Times, that talked about the whole new industry of basically policing, right? Of surveillance of your people, right? Checking the keystrokes. How much are you working? How much are you not? Even people that are coming in, like checking this. And it kind of grates against trust, right? It feels like, ugh. On the other hand, we also do know employees are, checking social media and websites and buying stuff on company time. So, this isn't so easy of a problem to solve. How should we you got 2 minutes, just solve it for me.
So it's a long conversation, but here's an illustration, Dave. When we had COVID-19 hit, companies had to make a lot of decisions very quickly with what to do. And I'll just pick on call centers, for example. Well, you can't put 300 people in the same big room, all on phones next to each other, 3 feet from each other in a COVID-19 environment. So what did they do? Well, at UnitedHealth Group, in a matter of a couple days, this is what I was told by a couple guys in their operations, they got those entire 300 forced people to work from home. They could do that. Well, why weren't those people allowed to work at home before? Well, because they didn't want them to work at home before. So desperation caused something to happen. And I believe people saw their organizations, that's just one example, do amazing things to stay afloat and to actually thrive. I mean, earnings continued for many companies. I mean, obviously hospitality, leisure got pounded, as did travel, but a lot of companies did very well. Now what's happening, organizations are saying, well, we want to go back to the way things were. And I believe the employee is saying, not so fast. You guys, it wasn't that you couldn't do it. It's just that you didn't want to do it. Give us some rationale for why it needs to change. And I believe it's harder and harder as a senior leader to thoughtfully understand and articulate why something needs to happen. So an employee would go, oh, okay, I understand it and I'm going to do it. Because as you said, David, there's an exchange of an employment arrangement. I give you money for the value you contribute. But if I don't feel valued and add value, then the exchange is not going to work. And I believe that a lot of employees don't feel very valued because their opinions are not being asked. They're overridden. They feel like they're being controlled. And a lot of this will come into the word feel. Now, feelings don't make earnings per share every quarter show up. That's execution, that's accountability. And there has to be a blend. As you well know, people will remember how they feel much longer. So unless leaders get that emotional quotient to work that in, which to me gets into some core elements of good culture, healthy culture.
How can you hold accountability there? Just one more jump here. Just how have you seen healthy accountability work virtually? Because call centers make sense because you get this many calls and you can see they went through this many calls. But I mean, just like a people manager, a role that doesn't have defined number of sales.
Well, I believe almost everything can be defined, David, but we just haven't taken the time to do it. Most job descriptions that are out there are cut and pasted from the previous job description. The leader doesn't thoughtfully go through and think about, well, what do I need this person to do? What outcomes am I trying to achieve? What can be empowered? What do I need to stay on top of and look over their shoulder? Very few people like to be micromanaged. So I think there is a yearning for employees to say, look, tell me what you want to have done, articulate that, be clear, and then I'll be accountable to that. That's hard work for a senior leader, very hard work, particularly when you get into scale of tens, hundreds, thousands of people. So I think, I'm not saying, David, there's an easy answer, as you well know, but it does take some time and some focus for senior leaders to get back to the drawing board on clarity and alignment, recognizing and also to be unified, Dave, because unification doesn't mean uniformity. You can still have huge diversity while being unified around the core values and mission of what you're trying to achieve.
Totally. Well, there's a lot here on culture and more. Let's get personal just for a few moments. How, I think people that lead well tend to lead themselves, at least in some way well, and we're all imperfect, certainly. But what are some things you do habitually to lead yourself well, health-wise, fitness-wise, life-wise, relationally? Is there a couple of habits that come to mind that help you be better so you can be better for others?
Well, the first habit is one that you helped me achieve on November 8th, 2014, where I went through the workshop of Trust Edge, and we got into the how, which gets into my own personal fueling up time in the morning. And when I was able to recognize that I needed to attach that priority, I had said it was a priority for years, but I didn't execute. But I never missed breakfast. When I said, I want that priority be before my physical food breakfast. Dave, I haven't missed many times since November 8th of 2014. So the how to go after habits has been very, very useful. The other thing is a lot of people talk about work-life balance and the boundaries that we may have. And for a lot of years, I thought that I could blame the organization for my own lack of boundaries. Well, the organization needs this, the needs that. No, they don't. No organization needs any one person. So to have the elasticity versus I'm not going to quit work at 6 every day, but I'm going to have thoughtful boundaries and blend what that looks like. That has been helpful to me because my priorities do change, and the urgency of those for real deadlines versus just made up deadlines to keep me moving, to discern what that is has been very, very useful.
Well, we've got a lot here and a lot more to go. Tell us where they can find out. And we're going to have to close it down for now. I'd love to have everybody meet you in person. I am so love the way you work, what you've done for work, and how you've made me better along the way. And so let's go. Where can people find out more about Spark Your Culture and the future, the upcoming book and so forth?
So I have a website, sparkyourculture.com. It's undergoing some changes right now, but you can reach me at my email address at davesparkman16@gmail.com. And I'd be
right. That'll all be in the show notes, trustedleadershow.com. It'll all be there, and you'll be able to find out more. It is the Trusted Leader Show. One last question for you, Dave. Who is a leader you trust and why?
There are several former leaders at UnitedHealth Group that I trust that are leading other organizations now. And I trust them because I've gotten to know them and I know what their values are personally and how they attach to the organizational values. So the reason I trust people is I see the personal character flowing into the organizational character. That's when I trust.
Great. Lots of those. Dave Sparkman, thank you so much. And thanks especially for being my friend. This has been the Trusted Leader Show. Until next time, stay trusted.